That's the Persian period in a nutshell. I want to move us now into what we call the Hellenistic period, and that is the period that begins in 332 BCE with the conquest of the then known world, the Persian Empire, and all of the Mediterranean world from Greece east by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. And I want to actually begin this discussion by pointing out that Hellenism, as we call it, that is the culture that arose at this period, which in many ways was a syncretism, a sort of a combination of Greek religion, Greek culture with Persian culture. Particularly, scholars will tell us that the dualism, and we'll see this in next week, we'll talk a bit more about apocalyptic literature, dualism, that is a clear sort of distinction between good and evil, the sons of light, the sons of darkness, the good guys, the bad guys, God and evil, God and the devil, that very apparent dualism of the cosmos, seeing the cosmos in dualistic terms, is probably a legacy of Persian Zoroastrianism, and we see that Persian Zoroastrianism combining with Greek culture, Greek religion, to form what we call Hellenistic culture, the culture that emerged from the kingdom, the empire that was established by Alexander the Great. The other thing that I want to point out about this period is, as I said before, you now have Jews living throughout this empire, throughout this territory, particularly in Babylon, but as I said before, also in Egypt. And in Egypt, particularly in the city of Alexandria, and of course Alexandria is named for Alexander the Great, and there was a sizable and actually rather prominent and prosperous Jewish community in Alexandria at this time. And it was at this time, probably sometime around the 3rd century BCE, that a translation of much of the Bible, not all of it, but certainly the Pentateuch and the Deuteronomic history, the books of the prophets, that these works were translated into Greek. And all of this comes out, by the way, in the next chapter from the Coogan book that we're responsible for, between Alexandria and Antioch, that essay by Leonard Greenspoon in our Coogan book. This is all described there, and I would urge you to take a look at it. But the Bible, or much of the Bible, was translated into Greek. There are all sorts of legends and stories. A work known as the Letter of Aristeas, and that describes this sort of quasi-miraculous event that the king of Egypt at that time, I think Philadelphus III, gathered scholars from Judea, 70 of them, to come and translate the Bible into Greek. And he put these 70 scholars into separate rooms, and they all came up with the same translation. So it's an authorized, canonical, orthodox, it's the real deal. This is the Greek translation of the Bible. I'm not sure if that's exactly what happened, but the Greek translation of the Bible actually comes to be known as the Septuagint. And that word Septuagint comes from sept, like in September, or sete, 7, set, that it refers to those 70 scholars who translated it. In any case, what's more likely is that the Jews of Alexandria, who, as I said, were plentiful, prosperous, well assimilated into Alexandrian culture, probably no longer knew Hebrew, like many Jews throughout the world today don't know Hebrew and read the Bible in their vernacular language. And so it's very possible that the Jews of Alexandria did not know Hebrew. They were Greek-speaking. They were part of this Hellenistic civilization, and they needed a Greek translation of the Bible, and so they got one. Now, historically speaking, what happened was in 332, Alexander the Great took over the Persian Empire. ruled all of Western Asia and Greece and Egypt. And when he died, his empire was divided among his 4 generals. The generals that are important to us are the general Seleucus, who was given the territory of Syria and Mesopotamia, and the general Ptolemy, that's spelled with a P at the beginning, a silent P, General Ptolemy, who was given rulership of Egypt. And so we have at this time what we call a Seleucid kingdom and a Ptolemaic kingdom. And of course, Palestine, as is often the case when you have vying kingdoms, like we saw before between Mesopotamia and Egypt during the the biblical period, we have this again, these 2 kingdoms, one in Mesopotamia, Syria, one in Egypt, vying for control of Palestine. For a period of time, Palestine was actually under the control of the Ptolemies, the rulers of Egypt. But in 198 BCE, a Seleucid king whose name was Antiochus, and this particular Antiochus is the 3rd king named Antiochus, and so we call him Antiochus III. He managed to wrest control of Palestine from the Ptolemies, and so from that time forward until the conquest by the Romans of the Hellenistic kingdom, the conquest by the Romans in the 1st century BCE, Palestine was ruled by these Seleucids. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Up until the time that the Judeans actually revolted from the Seleucid kingdom, Palestine was ruled by the Seleucids. But in any case, that's in 198 BCE. Eventually, Antiochus III was replaced by another king named Antiochus IV. And this Antiochus took the eponym Epiphanes. He was Antiochus Epiphanes. And Epiphanes means divine manifestation. He saw himself as the manifestation of God. He engaged in all sorts of machinations in Judea, in what is now the small, tiny province of Judea. The province of Judea at this point is probably just much more than Jerusalem and its immediate environs. And there was a series of high priests in Judea who were vying for, different priestly factions, different priestly houses that were vying for control, vying for the high priesthood, and they were going to Antioch, which was the capital of this Seleucid kingdom, and bribing various officials, bribing the king for the right to become the high priest, and the kings were responding in various ways to various ones of these priestly families trying to vie for control of the temple, for control of the high priesthood. And we actually can read about all of this in 2 works from now the Apocrypha. And I did tell you that we were going to read some of the Apocrypha, and in particular we're going to be reading from the book of 1 Maccabees, which gives us some of the machinations that these priests were engaging in with the Seleucid king. What I really want to focus on is the sort of the denouement of all of this, that is the rebellion by Judean leaders against Antiochus IV that we read about particularly in 1 Maccabees, and some of the issues that we're going to read about there that are issues that are going to remain issues as we move forward into the New Testament. So it turns out that in 169 BCE, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, begins expropriating huge sums of money from the temple treasury. He's been bribed for the priesthood anyway, but he wants more. Indeed, when he when a couple of years later, in the year 167 BCE, in 169 he begins expropriating money from the temple. In 167 BCE, he goes further. He apparently decides, and we're going to read about this in the book of First Maccabees, he apparently decides that he wants to institute a policy of what I would call pan-Hellenism in his kingdom. That is, all of these, well, in particular Judaism, I don't know, I must confess, I don't know what was happening in other parts of the kingdom. Probably most of the other religious traditions in the Hellenistic areas were perfectly willing to adopt Hellenistic culture. The Judeans might have been outliers in that regard, and Antiochus IV decides to institute a policy of pan-Hellenism. Everybody's going to be Greek. Now, we can talk about this later when we get, I'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the reading itself. But, in a way one might, refer to this as universalism, right? He's trying to institute a universal religion. Everybody's invited. Everybody can be Greek. Everybody can speak Greek. Everybody can participate in Greek culture. And, that would make us all one and unified and kumbaya. He indeed, in fact, in 167 BCE, he instituted a decree in Judea forbidding the practice of Jewish law and custom. He outlawed circumcision. He outlawed the study of Torah. And Jewish sacrifice. He actually, in fact, turned the temple into a temple of Zeus, a Greek temple. He placed a statue of Zeus in the temple, and in fact, we're going to see that in that same year, 167 BCE, a swine, a pig, a animal that would be unacceptable for an offering in the Jewish temple, was offered there. In that same year, 167, a revolt broke out. The revolt was instituted by a priest living in the Judean town of Modi'in. His name was Mattathias, and Mattathias had 5 sons, and the most famous of these 5 sons is a fellow by the name of Judah, and Judah had a nickname. His nickname was Maccabee, and he became known as Judah Maccabee. We're also going to be finding that we're going to refer to this family. They had a sort of a family name, and their family name was Hasmonean. They are known as the Hasmoneans. So we will sometimes refer to Mattathias, this priest who instituted this rebellion, as Mattathias the Hasmonean. Sometimes you will hear Judah Maccabee referred to as Judah Maccabee. Sometimes you will hear him referred to as Judah the Hasmonean. But it's these Hasmoneans who in 167 BCE began a revolt against King Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, and in 164 BCE the revolt was actually successful, and the Hellenistic Greek, the Seleucid leaders, the Seleucids, were thrown out. The temple was rededicated as a temple to Yahweh, a temple to God, and the proper sacrifices were reinstituted, and Judea then was ruled by these Hasmoneans until 63 BCE, when Jerusalem was conquered by the Romans, and we'll get to that next time. But I want to take a look at some of the passages the passages referring to this, particularly in the book of First Maccabees, and how this plays out, and again, particularly with what are the major issues that arise here. Actually, before I do that, before I get to the book of Maccabees, there's one other passage that we should refer to, and that is, I had asked you also to read